She boarded the plane like any other passenger, calm, self-contained, and dressed with quiet elegance. No one in that first-class cabin guessed that Cassandra Miles wasn't just another traveler. She was the CEO and majority shareholder of the very airline they were flying. But then it happened. A senior flight attendant looked her straight in the eye and refused to serve her. The air shifted, conversations dimmed, and the unspoken question hung heavy: was this about service, or something far deeper? What would you do if someone treated you like you didn't belong in a space you built with your own hands? Would you confront them in anger, or dismantle their prejudice with something far more powerful? As the miles passed beneath the wings, the quiet woman in seat 2A began a journey no passenger or crew member would ever forget. A journey that would end careers, rewrite company policy, and challenge the very core of human decency at 35,000 feet. Stay with us, because this story isn't just about an airline. It's about respect, justice, and the price of silence. Like, share, and subscribe, and let's step aboard Flight 207 together. The hum of boarding filled the first-class cabin of Aurora Sky's Flight 482 from San Francisco to Boston. Overhead, bins clicked shut. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the galley. Leather seats gleamed under soft morning light, each one perfectly angled toward the aisle. Outside, rain streaked the jet bridge windows, blurring the silhouettes of ground crew moving with mechanical precision. Doctor. Cassandra Miles sat in seat 2A, her handbag neatly tucked under the seat in front of her. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit and low black heels. Her hair was gathered into a sleek bun, silver strands catching the light when she turned her head. Nothing in her posture asked for attention, yet she seemed to draw it effortlessly. She had boarded without fanfare, no assistance, no entourage. She had smiled politely at the gate agent, thanked the crew member who pointed her toward the cabin, and taken her seat with the ease of someone who belonged there. Because she did. What no one on board knew, not even the crew, was that Cassandra wasn't just another first-class passenger. She was the CEO and majority shareholder of Aurora Sky's Airlines, and today she was traveling incognito. For months, letters and emails had landed on her desk quiet, unassuming complaints from passengers of color. They spoke of being treated differently, not denied service outright, but approached with less warmth, fewer options, cooler tones, not enough to make headlines, but enough to leave a mark. Cassandra had read every word. She had thought about the patterns, the possibilities, and the truth she already suspected. Bias didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered, and whispers, unchecked, could rot an entire culture. So she decided to see for herself. No corporate entourage. No pre-flight warning to the crew. Just her, a notebook, and a flight like any other. She was still adjusting the cuff of her sleeve when the voice came. "Ma'am, I think you might be in the wrong seat." Cassandra looked up. The flight attendant, Harper Lane, stood tall in her crisp uniform, a tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly at the back, her lipstick a sharp shade of red that matched the trim of her jacket. The expression on her face wasn't curiosity, it was certainty, wrapped in polite disapproval. "I'm sorry," Cassandra said evenly. "This is first class," Harper replied, her tone smooth but cool. "Maybe you got on the wrong plane." The words landed with a sharpness that belied the softness of her voice. Conversations around them stilled. A man in 2B glanced over his newspaper, A woman in 3A lowered her phone. The quiet that followed wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of tension. Cassandra's gaze remained steady. "My boarding pass says 2A. Harper's eyes flickered, just for a second, as if recalculating. Then she offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All right, then. We'll be starting service shortly." She turned, moving toward the aisle with a bright greeting for a white man in 1C. Her voice instantly warmer, her smile suddenly alive. Cassandra sat back. She didn't sigh. She didn't frown. She simply let the moment pass, filing it quietly away. The last of the passengers boarded. Overhead, bins closed with final clicks. The cabin door thudded shut. Harper glided down the aisle, her service cart rolling smoothly beside her. "Mr. Bennett," she said warmly to the silver-haired man in 2B. "Would you like sparkling or still sparkling?" "Please," Richard Bennett replied, returning her smile. He was a retired judge, still carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. Cassandra watched the exchange. The delicate stemware, the careful pour, the napkin placed just so. She had no issue with excellent service. She had an issue with who it was reserved for. As Harper moved down the aisle, Cassandra waited. When the cart approached again, she lifted a hand slightly. "May I please have some water?" For a fraction of a second, Harper's eyes hardened. The smile faltered. Then came the reply, "We're busy right now. Ma'am, you'll need to wait your turn." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Crisp, clipped, a dismissal dressed as procedure. Cassandra lowered her hand. She looked past Harper to the galley, where a young black flight attendant, Noah Carter, was preparing a tray. His eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to his work. The cart rolled on. Harper stopped at row 3, leaning in with a warm laugh for a pair of tech executives in tailored suits. Richard shifted in his seat. He glanced at Cassandra, then at Harper, then back again. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing. The engines outside began their low whine, a signal that pushback was near. Cassandra sat still, the leather cool under her palms. She thought of her mother's voice measured, firm, telling her as a young woman that dignity wasn't about silence or noise. It was about knowing exactly when to speak. Not yet, she thought. At the rear of the cabin, Noah stacked cups on a tray, glancing up now and then. He had only been with the airline 3 months. He knew the rules. He knew Harper had seniority. But something about the way she skipped over 2A, it didn't feel like an oversight. It felt like a decision. The intercom crackled. "Good morning. Folks, this is your captain, Elias Monroe. We're just waiting for clearance to push back. Should be on our way shortly." Cassandra folded her hands in her lap, eyes on the aisle. Harper was moving back toward the front, chatting with passengers as though nothing had happened. When she passed 2A, she didn't look down. Cassandra felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, not of humiliation, but of recognition. She had lived through enough to know what she was seeing. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a measure. And she had been measured in the eyes of someone who had already decided she did not belong. She picked up her phone and tapped a note: Flight 482. Harper Lane, denied water request, tone dismissive, selective warmth toward others. She set the phone down. Outside, the rain was still falling. Inside, the air was starting to feel tight. This was only the beginning. The rain outside had softened to a mist, streaking the windows in thin silver lines. Inside the cabin, the hum of the engines was steady, patient. Harper Lane moved with the assurance of someone who had done this 1,000 times, her posture straight, her smile ready, but the smile never touched 2A. She stopped at the row ahead, crouched slightly to speak to a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit. "Would you care for champagne to start your morning?" "Sir." Her voice was warm, almost musical. He accepted with a grin. She poured, tilting the bottle just enough to create a fine crown of bubbles in his glass. She added a linen napkin to the armrest with a little flourish before rolling the cart forward again. Cassandra Miles watched, her face neutral, her eyes calm. She had learned long ago not to flinch in the moment. Every reaction, every decision had to be deliberate. She was not here to trade insults. She was here to see. Richard Bennett glanced sideways, then looked down at his folded hands. His throat tightened with the discomfort of a man who had seen the imbalance but could not quite bring himself to name it. Years on the bench had taught him to wait until all the evidence was in. But this was not a courtroom. This was a cabin, 30,000 feet from neutrality. From the galley. Noah Carter emerged, his steps measured. He was carrying a tray of juices and water, eyes scanning the cabin. He caught Cassandra's gaze for the briefest second. There was something there, an unspoken acknowledgement, before he shifted his attention back to his work. Harper leaned in toward a young blonde woman in 1A. "We have freshly brewed Ethiopian roast this morning. Would you like a cup?" The woman smiled, nodded, and received her coffee in a porcelain mug. Harper added a chocolate square on the saucer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Then she passed Cassandra without slowing. The air seemed to tighten around 2A. Cassandra's hands rested lightly on her knees. She did not call out. She did not tap her glass. She simply observed. Noah returned to the galley and began stacking cups. From where he stood, he could see Harper's pattern as clearly as the lines on a runway, offer warmth and extras to some, pass others with efficiency so sharp it cut. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight in his chest. Harper's cart moved to the other side of the cabin. She served 2 older gentlemen with mimosas and easy laughter. She refilled a glass before the man even had to ask. Cassandra shifted her gaze to the window. Raindrops raced each other down the glass in irregular paths. She let her eyes follow them, using the movement to ground herself. She had been in enough boardrooms to recognize performance when she saw it. Her phone rested on the seat beside her, the screen dark. She thought briefly about the email she had read in her office just weeks ago. A mother from Chicago who felt invisible on a flight to Miami. A businessman from Dallas who had been told a menu item was unavailable, only to watch it served to another passenger minutes later. Stories so small they could be dismissed, yet so consistent they could not be ignored. This morning, those stories were no longer words on a screen. They were alive, playing out 3 feet in front of her. Richard cleared his throat. A low sound. Cassandra glanced at him, his lips parted, as if he might speak. But then Harper appeared again with her bright, polished smile, offering him a second glass of sparkling water. He accepted, murmured thanks, and the moment slipped away. Harper's eyes flicked toward Cassandra, just long enough to acknowledge her presence without engagement. Then she moved on. Noah reappeared from the galley carrying a stack of folded linen napkins. As he walked past, his eyes met Cassandra's again. This time he hesitated. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" His voice was low, Careful, respectful. Cassandra offered a small smile. Not right now. Thank you. He nodded once, then moved down the aisle, placing napkins neatly on each armrest. But, in his head, a quiet storm was building. He had been taught to treat all passengers equally, to see service as a reflection of the airline's values. Watching Harper now, he wondered if the values on paper were the same as the ones practiced in the aisle. Harper rolled the cart toward the galley, pausing to chat with the young woman in 1A again. Cassandra noticed the way Harper's shoulders softened, the way her laughter lingered before she moved on. Noah slipped into the galley behind her, placing the napkins down and starting on a new tray. Harper's voice floated back to him. Be mindful of your service order. Noah, follow the flow. Senior staff set the pace. Yes, ma'am, he said, but his tone was tight. Back in 2A, Cassandra adjusted her seat slightly, turning toward the aisle. She could feel the subtle shift in the cabin. The young Latina businesswoman across the aisle was watching Harper now, too, her eyes narrowing slightly each time Harper passed without stopping at Cassandra's row. The engines deepened their tone as the plane pushed back from the gate. Safety instructions began over the loudspeakers, but the quiet unease between 2A and the galley did not move. Cassandra picked up her phone and tapped another line into her note. Consistent pattern of selective engagement, warmth offered to white passengers, minimal interaction with others. She saved the note and set the phone down again. Outside, the runway blurred in the light rain. Inside, the distance between seats felt smaller, the air a little heavier. Richard folded his newspaper, his fingers tapping against the armrest. Long flight ahead, he murmured. Cassandra turned to him, her expression calm. We'll see, she said softly. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for takeoff. Harper passed once more, checking belts and bins, offering last smiles. None of them landed in 2A. Cassandra's breathing stayed even. She had waited years for opportunities to act at the right moment. She would wait again, but the ledger in her mind was already filling when the engines roared and the plane began its ascent. Cassandra looked out the window at the climbing sky. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, still and composed, but behind the stillness was the kind of resolve that did not need to announce itself to be felt. This was not over. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. The cabin tilted gently as the plane leveled into its climb, the hum of the engines settling into a steady rhythm. The clouds outside were a pale blur, stretching in long sheets across the morning sky. Harper Lane emerged from the galley with the service cart, her polished smile already in place. She stopped at 1A, setting down a fresh cup of coffee with the care of someone placing a delicate gift. A warm laugh, a quick lean in for a quiet remark. Then the cart rolled forward. Champagne glasses clinked as she replenished them in 1B and 1C. Cassandra, Miles watched, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed but alert. She had been in countless meetings where the real conversation happened in what was unsaid, where the decisions were made before the discussion even began. She could read the signals here, too. Harper's tone lifted when speaking to certain passengers. Her hands lingered when offering a glass. Her shoulders eased when leaning toward the right faces. The cart rolled to Richard Bennett in 2B. Harper's voice softened. Would you care for another sparkling, Mr. Bennett? Richard shook his head politely, his hand resting on the folded newspaper in his lap. Harper gave him a warm nod, the kind that conveyed familiarity. then looked toward Cassandra without lowering her voice. "We're busy right now, ma'am. You'll have to wait your turn." Cassandra had not even spoken. She had only raised her hand slightly, a quiet request, but the words came as if she had interrupted something vital. She kept her voice level. "May I please have some water?" Harper's smile was professional but tight. "We'll get to you when we can." The words hung in the air for a moment, small but heavy. Cassandra let her hand drop. She did not push back. The cabin around her felt smaller, the space between rows more constricting. In the row across the aisle, the young Latina businesswoman looked up from her tablet, eyes following Harper for a moment longer than before. Harper moved on, her tone bright again for the couple in 3A and 3B. She poured wine, offered snacks, even placed a chocolate on their armrests. Cassandra watched the entire exchange with the patience of someone collecting data rather than defending pride. In the galley, Noah Carter was restocking glasses. From his vantage point, he could see Harper's movements, her sequence of service. He saw who got offered extras without asking and who was approached with minimal words. His jaw tightened. He had been told during training that first-class service was about anticipation, about treating each passenger as if they were the only one in the cabin. What he was watching now did not match that vision. When Harper returned to the galley to refill the wine bottle, Noah glanced toward 2A. Cassandra was looking out the window, her expression unreadable. He considered stepping out to offer her something himself, but stopped. He was still on probation. Harper had seniority. Speaking out could mean trouble. Back in the cabin, Richard shifted in his seat. His eyes had followed Harper's pattern all morning, and now he felt the weight of it. He cleared his throat softly. "Would you like me to get the attendant for you?" he asked Cassandra in a low voice. Her gaze turned to him, calm and steady. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. But no, I'm all right." There was no edge in her tone, no bitterness, just control. Richard nodded and looked down at his newspaper again. But the words on the page no longer held his attention. The scent of freshly brewed coffee floated from the galley. Harper passed through again, offering a mug to the passenger in 1B, then bending toward 1C to refill his champagne. Cassandra watched her approach, her own request still unmet. The moment Harper passed her row without stopping, Cassandra turned her head toward the window. She could feel the subtle shift in the air. The young Latina woman glanced up again. A man, 2 rows back, leaned slightly into the aisle, his eyes following Harper's path. No one spoke, but silence had a sound of its own. In her mind, Cassandra replayed her years in the industry, the times she had been told she did not look the part for a leadership role, the moments she had walked into meetings and been assumed to be an assistant. She had survived all of it, and now, as the head of the very company she once had to fight to enter, she was here to ensure that others would not have to endure the same quiet diminishment. Harper's cart reached the end of the cabin. She parked it near the galley and disappeared inside. A moment later, Noah emerged with a tray of water glasses. His steps slowed as he reached 2A. "Would you like some water?" "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet but sure. Cassandra looked up at him. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Carter." He set the glass on her tray table with care. "Anything else I can get for you?" Her smile was small but warm. "No, you've already done more than enough." Noah nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, and continued down the aisle. In the galley. Harper glanced toward him with a look that was half question, half warning. Noah avoided her eyes. Cassandra lifted the glass and took a slow sip. The water was cool, clean. It was such a simple thing. Yet, in this moment, it carried a weight that had nothing to do with thirst. The engines hummed. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional clink of glass or low murmur of conversation. Cassandra set the glass down and folded her hands in her lap. She was not here to win a small battle over service. She was here to reveal the larger truth beneath it. When Harper re-emerged, she passed 2A without looking down. Cassandra did not watch her go. She glanced instead at the reflection in the window. Behind her calm expression was the same steady resolve she had carried into every boardroom and negotiation. This flight had only just begun, but she already knew one thing. There would be a reckoning before it was over. The seatbelt sign remained off. The cabin had settled into that quiet rhythm that comes after takeoff, when passengers recline slightly and the first hints of breakfast service begin somewhere near the front. The sound of a wine cork easing free punctuated the hum of the engines. Harper Lane returned from the galley, her service cart neatly restocked. The aroma of warm bread rolls drifted ahead of her, mingling with the scent of coffee. She stopped at 1A to offer a croissant, bending low to exchange a few more words with the blonde woman. Her voice was light, as if the two were old friends sharing a secret. When Harper reached 1B and 1C, she described the breakfast options with enthusiasm. We have seared salmon with herb butter or pasta primavera. Both are excellent today. She smiled as if inviting them into a shared pleasure. Cassandra Miles sat in 2A, listening. She knew that the pasta primavera was the vegetarian option. She waited until Harper turned toward her row. "I have a dietary restriction," Cassandra said evenly. "Could I request the vegetarian option for lunch?" Harper's eyes flicked toward her tray as though checking an invisible list. "We ran out of that one. You'll have to take what's left." Her tone was clipped, the warmth absent. She moved to face Richard Bennett in 2B without pause. "Would you prefer the salmon or the pasta, Mr. Bennett?" "Both are excellent." Richard's head turned sharply toward her. "Are you telling me she doesn't get a choice?" Harper's smile tightened. "We have limited inventory today. Standard procedure." Richard's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't feel very standard." Harper straightened, clearly eager to move on. She pivoted toward the next row, her smile blossoming again as she addressed the couple behind them. Cassandra looked at Richard, her expression calm. "Thank you, but it's fine," she said softly. She was not fine, but her patience was deliberate. She was cataloging each interaction in the galley. Noah Carter had heard enough of the exchange to piece together what had happened. His stomach tightened. He had been taught that service discrepancies could happen because of supply limits, but the quick shift in tone, the offering to one passenger immediately after denying another, did not feel like a shortage. It felt like choice. The young Latina businesswoman across the aisle glanced between Cassandra and Harper. She whispered something to her seatmate in Spanish, the words carrying a sharp edge. Cassandra returned her gaze to the window. Outside, the sky had opened into a soft blue, the rain clouds left far behind, but inside, the air was thicker, heavier. She'd seen this pattern before in other contexts, a smile for some, indifference for others. In a boardroom, it could be masked as oversight. On a flight, it was exposed for what it was. Noah stepped into the aisle with a tray of beverages. His voice was low when he reached Cassandra's row. "Can I get you anything?" "Ma'am, water, tea." Cassandra looked up at him and allowed a small smile. "Water would be lovely. Thank you." He nodded and moved toward the galley. Harper's gaze followed him, her expression tightening. Noah returned moments later with a chilled glass, setting it gently on Cassandra's tray table. "Here you go, ma'am," he said softly. "Thank you." "Mr. Carter," Cassandra replied. Their eyes met for a moment, the silent exchange one of mutual understanding. The couple behind Cassandra leaned slightly forward, clearly aware of the undercurrent. The man in 3A raised his eyebrows at his companion before returning to his meal. From her seat, Cassandra could see Harper's jaw clench as she continued serving further down the aisle. There was a tension in the way she moved now, as though the act of being observed had unsettled her. Richard leaned closer to Cassandra. "She's going out of her way to ignore you," he said quietly. Cassandra's gaze remained forward. "She's not ignoring me. She's making a point." Richard frowned. "And you're just going to let it slide? I'm not here to cause a scene," Cassandra said. "I'm here to see the truth. And now I have." Her words lingered between them, not defensive, but final. In the rear galley, Harper paused to adjust the coffee pots. She caught her own reflection in the stainless steel paneling and looked away quickly. The rhythm of the cabin was different now. Passengers were quieter, more watchful. She could feel their eyes even when they weren't looking directly at her. Cassandra took another sip of water, her mind sharpening. She thought about the time she'd been told that bias in service was just perception, that most people did not mean anything by it. Yet here she was, in a setting where every action was visible, every difference in tone measurable. There was no hiding from this evidence. Noah moved past her row again, offering a tray of warm nuts to passengers in 1B and 1C. Harper's voice could be heard at the other end of the cabin, bright and engaging with a pair of tech executives. The young Latina woman across the aisle caught Cassandra's eye and gave a subtle nod. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of recognition. Cassandra returned the nod. From the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. We expect smooth skies ahead." His tone was calm, reassuring. In 2A, Cassandra sat back against the leather seat. Her hands were folded loosely in her lap, but her mind was anything but relaxed. She knew what she had seen, and she knew what it meant. The next move would be hers. The cabin had grown quieter, the kind of stillness that comes when a pattern begins to take shape and everyone is aware of it, but no one has spoken its name. Cassandra Miles sat in 2A, her gaze steady on the aisle. She had allowed enough time for courtesy to prevail, for professionalism to find its footing. It had not. Every passing moment added another line to the record she was building in her mind. Harper Lane moved down the opposite aisle, her voice bright for the man in 3D. She placed a small plate of cheese and crackers on his tray, added a folded linen napkin, and laughed lightly at something he said. The laughter faded as she turned and caught sight of Cassandra watching her. Harper's smile thinned. She pivoted away, making a slow pass toward the galley. Cassandra reached up and pressed the silver call button above her seat. A soft chime rang overhead. A few heads turned. Harper glanced back, saw the light above 2A, and continued walking without acknowledgement. Cassandra pressed it again. This time, she tapped twice in quick succession. The chime repeated, sharper in the silence. Conversations that had been murmuring in the background fell quiet. Harper's stride changed. She moved toward 2A with brisk steps, the kind that carried more annoyance than service. When she reached the row, her voice was clipped. Yes, Cassandra looked up at her. Calm. I'd like to speak to the captain. Harper blinked once, caught off guard. He's busy with final checks. He can't come out right now. That's fine, Cassandra replied evenly. Please let him know I'm requesting to speak with him immediately. Harper hesitated. Her lips parted as if to object. But before she could speak, Richard Bennett's voice cut through the quiet. She has every right to speak to the captain. His tone carried the weight of someone used to being heard. We all saw what happened, and frankly, I think it's time someone did something about it. The ripple moved through the cabin like a sudden wind. Heads turned. The young Latina businesswoman sat forward in her seat. The man in 3A leaned out into the aisle. Passengers exchanged glances, some with surprise, others with something closer to relief. Harper's face flushed. She looked from Richard to Cassandra, then back again. Words seemed to stick in her throat. She turned without another comment and walked toward the front of the cabin. Noah Carter stepped out of the galley just in time to see her disappear behind the cockpit door. His eyes moved to Cassandra, a question in them. Cassandra gave the smallest nod. The cabin door opened, and Captain Elias Monroe stepped into the aisle. Tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver in his hair. He carried himself with the steady presence of a man who had spent decades at the controls of a jet. His eyes scanned the cabin once before landing on Cassandra. "Dr. Miles," he said, his voice steady and clear. "It's been a long time. What seems to be the issue here?" The recognition in his voice was unmistakable. Harper's head snapped around. Confusion etched across her face. "You know her." Monroe turned to her without missing a beat. "Yes, I do. She is the reason I am still flying today, and the reason you have a job." Cassandra rose slowly from her seat. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture, but her presence filled the space. "Captain," she began, her tone measured. "I've been on this flight for over 20 minutes. I've made 3 polite requests for water, for a meal option, for basic service, and each time I was ignored, dismissed, or denied. Meanwhile, passengers around me were offered multiple options, smiles, and courtesy. The difference in treatment was not accidental. It was intentional." Harper opened her mouth. "That's not true. She's exaggerating." "I didn't mean." Monroe lifted a hand. "Let her finish." Richard stood, placing a hand lightly on the seat in front of him. "Captain, I saw it too. She's not exaggerating. I almost spoke up earlier, but it kept getting worse. The rest of us were treated like VIPs. She was treated like she didn't belong here." The Latina businesswoman across the aisle nodded. "I saw it. It was clear as day." Noah stepped forward, his voice careful but firm. "Sir, I witnessed it as well. I tried to help. I brought her water after it was denied. I heard the tone, and I saw the difference." Harper spun toward him, disbelief flaring. "Noah, what are you doing?" Noah's shoulders straightened. "What's right?" Monroe turned back to Harper. "Do you understand who Dr. Miles is?" Harper shook her head slowly. "She's a passenger. She's the CEO of Aurora Skies Airlines," Monroe said. The words fell into the cabin with a weight that made the air feel heavier. A collective gasp moved through the rows. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A man in row 3 muttered, "That explains everything." Harper's face drained of color. "I didn't know," she said, her voice shaking. Cassandra's gaze was unwavering. "You didn't care. That's the problem." Harper looked around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The silence pressed in. "This isn't about me." Cassandra continued. "It's about how easily a woman like me can be overlooked, dismissed, even insulted because of assumptions, because of the way I look. The seat I paid for didn't change that. The smile I offered didn't matter. But what does matter is what happens next." Monroe nodded slowly. "With your permission, Dr. Miles, I would like to remove Ms. Lane from first-class service for the remainder of the flight. I will assign Mr. Carter to this cabin." Cassandra gave one short nod. "That's appropriate." Monroe faced Harper. "You will report to the rear galley for the rest of the flight. We will review this incident upon landing." Harper's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She turned and walked down the aisle toward the back, every step heavy. The curtain closed behind her with a soft thud that seemed to change the air in the cabin. Noah moved toward Cassandra's row, holding a chilled bottle of water. He placed it on her tray table with quiet respect. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Ma'am Cassandra looked at him, saw the sincerity in his eyes, and smiled. "Just keep being who you are. That's more than enough." Around them, the cabin remained hushed. It was not the silence of fear now, but of realization. Something important had just taken place, and the flight was far from over. Captain Elias Monroe remained in the aisle for a moment longer, his presence filling the narrow space between rows. The quiet hum of the aircraft was the only sound. He looked at Cassandra Miles with a mixture of respect and gravity. "Dr. Miles," he said in a lower tone meant only for her, "I want to personally apologize for what has happened on this flight. This is not how we do things here." Cassandra met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate that, Captain, but I didn't come here for an apology. I came here to see if the reports I've been reading had any weight. Now I know." Elias nodded once, the corners of his eyes tightening. "Understood." He turned to Noah Carter, who was standing just a step behind. "You're in charge of first-class service now. Mr. Carter, make sure everyone here is taken care of." "Yes, sir," Noah replied, the nervousness in his voice replaced by something firmer. The captain then addressed the entire cabin, his voice carrying without strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll continue our flight as scheduled, and I assure you, you are in good hands." His words were meant to calm, but they also carried an unspoken message. Order had been restored. He returned to the cockpit, closing the door gently behind him. The curtain at the rear of the cabin swayed slightly as Harper Lane moved behind it, now out of sight. The change was immediate. The tension in the air shifted, loosening just enough for people to breathe more easily. Conversations began again in low tones. Noah approached Cassandra's seat with a service towel over one arm, the kind of gesture reserved for the most attentive care. "Dr. Miles, may I offer you your choice of beverage and snack to start?" She inclined her head slightly. "Water will do for now, and whatever vegetarian option we actually have on board." He gave a small smile. "We have pasta primavera. I'll have it prepared for you." Richard Bennett leaned back in his seat, letting out a slow breath. He turned toward Cassandra. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to call for the captain. You kept so calm, I thought you might just let it pass." Cassandra's eyes softened slightly. "There's a difference between silence and strategy. Mr. Bennett. If I had reacted too soon, it might have been dismissed as overreacting. I wanted everyone to see the full picture before I spoke." Richard nodded slowly, as if filing the thought away. "You're right. Seeing it unfold, it was undeniable." A few rows back, the young Latina businesswoman leaned slightly into the aisle. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm glad you spoke up. People notice more than they admit. You gave us permission to see it." Cassandra acknowledged her with a small smile, then returned her attention to the window. Outside, the sky was an endless sweep of pale blue. Inside, the cabin felt smaller but warmer, as though the air had shifted in her favor. Noah returned with a chilled bottle of water and a clean glass. He poured it carefully, the crystal-clear liquid catching the light. "Here you go, ma'am," he said. "Your meal will follow shortly." She thanked him, her voice carrying enough warmth to be heard by the passengers nearby. In the rear galley, Harper stood with her arms folded tightly. She could still hear the faint murmur of voices from the front cabin. The sound made her jaw tense. She had been humiliated, stripped of her authority in front of a cabin full of people. She told herself it was unfair, that no one had given her the benefit of the doubt. But somewhere, under the heat of her anger, a quieter voice whispered a different truth. She had treated Cassandra differently from the moment she saw her in 2A. She hadn't even asked to see her boarding pass before making the assumption. Harper pushed the thought away and began restocking trays. Back in first class, Noah's presence changed the rhythm. He moved with care, his attention evenly distributed. Each passenger received the same tone, the same level of detail. Warm nuts in porcelain dishes, drink refills before they were requested, small gestures of attentiveness that made the cabin feel balanced again. Richard noticed it immediately. "Feels different in here already," he murmured to Cassandra. "That's because fairness has a weight," she said quietly. "When it's missing, people feel the imbalance even if they don't name it." Noah delivered Cassandra's meal with the same grace he gave everyone else. The aroma of fresh herbs rose from the pasta primavera, steam curling upward. She thanked him again, noting the steadiness in his hands. As she ate, she let her thoughts drift. She remembered her first months in the airline industry, when she'd been a junior analyst in a company where no one in leadership looked like her. She had learned quickly that perception could be as powerful as policy. Today's flight was proving that nothing much had changed unless someone was willing to confront it directly. When Noah returned to clear plates, Cassandra said, "Mr. Carter, I want you to know that your professionalism today hasn't gone unnoticed. It takes courage to step in when you're new." He hesitated, glancing toward the cockpit before speaking. "Honestly, I was worried about what might happen, but it didn't feel right to just stand by. That fear is real," she said. "I've felt it too. But silence never improves anything. You did the right thing." Noah nodded, and for the first time since boarding, the tension in his expression eased. The rest of the meal service moved smoothly. Passengers began to relax, their earlier unease replaced by something like quiet respect for the woman in 2A who had shifted the course of the flight without ever raising her voice. Still, Cassandra knew this was only one small step. The larger change, the one that mattered, would have to happen beyond this cabin, in boardrooms and training sessions, in the unspoken rules that shaped every interaction. As Noah moved back to the galley, Richard leaned closer. So, what happens now? After the flight, Cassandra's lips curved into a faint smile. Now, Mr. Bennett, we make sure it never happens again. The engines hummed steadily, carrying them eastward. The confrontation was over for the moment, but the work it had sparked was only beginning. The curtain at the rear of the cabin swayed gently as Harper Lane disappeared behind it. The soft thump of the fabric closing felt like the sealing of a door. In the aisle, Noah Carter adjusted the service towel on his arm. He moved to the first row with a calm purpose, offering refills and light conversation in an even tone that carried no favoritism. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. The cabin, moments ago taut with tension, began to breathe again. Richard Bennett accepted a coffee refill and murmured his thanks. Across the aisle, the young Latina businesswoman asked for tea. Noah served them both without hurry, without any sense that one request held more value than the other. Cassandra, Miles watched the transformation with a quiet satisfaction. This was how service should feel. No one leaning forward to be noticed. No one made to feel smaller than their seat. Just steady, dignified care. She sipped her water, her eyes moving between Noah's attentive service and the faces of the passengers. She could see the change there, too. People sitting back instead of leaning forward. The flicker of guardedness in their expressions replaced by a softer ease. Behind the curtain, Harper stood at the rear galley counter, arms folded tightly. She could still hear the muffled sounds of Noah's voice up front. Each time he laughed softly with a passenger. Something sharp twisted in her chest. She told herself it wasn't jealousy, that it was about principle, about him undermining her authority. But deep down, another truth pressed in. She had been wrong, and not just wrong in procedure. She had not seen Cassandra as a passenger first. She had seen her as an intruder in a space Harper thought she understood. The realization was too uncomfortable to hold, so she let it slide away, burying it under the old justifications. People are so quick to take offense. I was just doing my job. She busied herself restocking snack trays, moving faster than necessary, the motion keeping her thoughts from settling. In the front, Noah reached Cassandra's row with a small plate of fruit and a linen napkin. "A light refreshment before we begin dessert service," he said softly. Cassandra inclined her head. "Thank you." As he stepped away, Richard leaned toward her. "I've been flying for decades. I've seen bad service before, but this, it was something else. It was intentional." Her eyes stayed on the plate in front of her. Yes, and intentional behavior needs intentional correction. Richard studied her for a moment. "That's why you called the captain. That's why I'm on this flight at all," she replied. Her tone was calm, but there was a current under it, a quiet fire that had been there since boarding. Richard recognized it. It was the same energy he had seen in lawyers who walked into court knowing they were about to dismantle an injustice, piece by piece. Noah returned to clear plates from the front row. His movements were steady now, his earlier nerves replaced by the focus of someone who understood the weight of his role. Each thank you he received seemed to strengthen his resolve. Cassandra watched him closely. She had seen many young employees crumble under the pressure of doing the right thing. Noah had not. That mattered. Her mind began to move ahead, past this flight, past the landing in Boston. She imagined the conversations she would have with her leadership team, the directives she would write. The incident in 2A would not be just another complaint buried in a file. It would be a turning point. She glanced at Richard. "Have you ever written for a national audience?" "Not in years," he said, surprised. "Why? Because people need to hear from witnesses as much as from those directly affected. If you're willing, your voice could help push this beyond one flight." Richard considered it, his expression tightening in thought. "I'll think about it." Noah approached again, this time with dessert. He presented a small plate with a slice of cheesecake and fresh berries. "For you, Dr. Miles, and of course, I can offer something lighter if you prefer." "This is fine," she said, her smile faint but genuine. As she took a bite, she let the richness of the cheesecake dissolve slowly. The cabin had shifted into a new equilibrium, but she could still feel the faint pulse of what had happened. The incident was not over. It had only been contained. At the rear, Harper stacked cups in a bin, her movements clipped. The sound of ceramic against plastic was louder than it needed to be. A younger flight attendant passing through gave her a brief glance, but said nothing. Harper stared at the reflection of her own hands in the metal counter. For the first time, she felt the weight of the passengers' eyes from earlier, the way their silence had felt like a verdict. Up front, Noah cleared dessert plates from rows 1 and 2, then returned with hot towels. Cassandra accepted hers with a nod. "Mr. Carter," she said as he collected the used towel, "you've shown something important today. Integrity under pressure. I hope you understand the value of that." He hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly toward the cockpit. "I do now, ma'am. I didn't want to regret staying quiet." "That's a regret that lasts a lifetime," Cassandra said. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our descent into Boston shortly. Please remain seated as we prepare the cabin." Cassandra placed her glass on the tray table and looked out the window. The early afternoon light washed the clouds in gold. Somewhere below, the city waited, but her mind was already on what would come after. She thought of the meetings she would call, the policies she would draft, and she thought of Harper, standing at the back, locked in the first stages of her own reckoning. The curtain remained closed, but Cassandra knew that behind it. The story of this flight was still unfolding in ways no one else could see. The cabin felt different now. The change was not loud or dramatic, but it was there. It lingered in the way passengers leaned back in their seats rather than forward in quiet anticipation, in the way voices had settled into an easy murmur instead of clipped whispers. Up front, Noah Carter moved with steady rhythm. His hands no longer trembled when he poured water or set down a plate. He met each passenger's eyes, his tone even and consistent. Whether he was serving a business executive in a tailored suit or a young traveler in jeans and sneakers, Cassandra Miles noticed every detail. She watched the way he stopped for a moment at each row, not rushing anyone. It was a simple thing, but simple things revealed values. Richard Bennett took a sip of his coffee, glancing toward her. "Feels like another flight entirely," he murmured. "That's because fairness changes the air in the room," Cassandra said quietly. "It's invisible until it's gone. Then everyone feels the absence." Richard nodded, letting her words sink in. He had presided over trials where fairness was contested and fragile. He recognized the shift when it appeared. Behind the curtain, Harper Lane stood in the rear galley, her arms braced against the counter. She could not see the front cabin, but she could hear the low hum of contentment, the occasional soft laugh from Noah's interactions. The sound pressed against her like a weight. She had told herself that she had been doing her job. She had convinced herself that Cassandra had taken things out of context, that passengers often misinterpreted tone. But the way the cabin had settled after she was reassigned made that defense harder to hold on to. Harper stared at the stainless steel paneling in front of her, seeing her own reflection faintly in its dull shine. She remembered the first moment she had seen Cassandra during boarding. A quick glance, a snap judgment, and then the assumption that she was out of place. The memory made her stomach tighten. She turned away, opening a storage drawer just to keep her hands busy. The clatter of utensils filled the space, but it did not drown out the quiet realization growing in the back of her mind. Up front, Noah delivered hot towels, the faint scent of citrus rising as passengers pressed them to their hands. Cassandra accepted hers, folding it neatly after use. He collected it with a polite nod. "We'll be offering a light snack before landing. Would you like fruit or something savory?" "Fruit will be fine," she said. He made his way down the aisle, offering the same choices to each passenger without deviation. Cassandra turned slightly in her seat, looking past Richard to the rows behind. The young Latina woman who had nodded at her earlier was reading again, but every so often her eyes lifted toward the front. Their gazes met briefly, and Cassandra gave her a small, reassuring smile. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Monroe adjusted the controls while his first officer monitored the flight path. Elias's thoughts drifted briefly to the scene earlier in the cabin. He had flown for decades, had seen moments of tension between crew and passengers, but rarely had he seen such a calm, deliberate dismantling of bias. He respected Cassandra before. After today, that respect had deepened. In the rear galley, Harper leaned back against the counter, her jaw taut. She hated feeling watched even when no one could see her. She thought about the suspension that might come. She thought about the way passengers had looked at her when the captain revealed who Cassandra was. That gasp, that shift in the air, it had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She remembered moments from her own career when she had been treated unfairly, dismissed by senior crew, underestimated by passengers. She had sworn then that she would never make anyone feel that way. Somewhere along the way, she had broken that promise. Up front, Noah returned with Cassandra's fruit plate. The slices were arranged neatly, a small sprig of mint in the center. "Here you are, ma'am," he said, placing it in front of her. She looked at the plate, then up at him. "You've done more than serve food today, Mr. Carter. You've reminded people that service and respect aren't separate things." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "I just tried to do what felt right. That's all any of us can do," she replied. Richard shifted in his seat, watching the exchange. "Dr. Miles," he said after a moment, "earlier you mentioned reports you'd been reading. How often has this kind of thing come across your desk?" "Often enough that I couldn't ignore it," Cassandra said. "Too often for it to be coincidence." Richard's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Then it's a bigger problem than one flight attendant." "Yes," Cassandra agreed, "and that's why this won't end when we land." The words carried a quiet weight, the kind that left no doubt they were more than a passing comment. Noah moved back toward the galley to prepare for landing service. Cassandra watched him go, then turned her gaze to the window. The late afternoon light was shifting now, the clouds tinged with gold. The world below was hidden, but she could imagine the city coming into focus as they descended. In the rear galley, Harper rested her hands on the counter and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about walking back into the first-class cabin to apologize, but pride kept her still. The idea of facing Cassandra now made her throat tighten. Up front, passengers began to adjust their seats, gathering their belongings in preparation for descent. Noah checked each row, his tone consistent, his movements unhurried. When he reached Cassandra again, he said quietly, "We'll be landing soon. Is there anything else I can get for you before we prepare the cabin?" "No," she said, "but thank you for asking." As he moved on, Richard leaned closer. "You know, I think I might take you up on that suggestion about writing something after this." Cassandra's eyes softened. "Good. People need to understand that silence is part of the problem, and that speaking up doesn't have to mean shouting." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent. Passengers began to settle in. Cassandra took one last sip of water and set the glass down with deliberate care. Her mind was already in the hours ahead, the calls she would make, the meetings she would convene, the way this flight would become a catalyst for something larger than itself. And, in the quiet between announcements, she thought of the young man in the galley and the older woman standing in the back. One had chosen integrity. The other still had a choice to make. The hum of the engines shifted as the captain announced their final approach. Outside the window, the clouds had thinned, revealing slivers of coastline and the soft shimmer of water catching the late afternoon light. The descent had begun, but in the cabin, the undercurrents from earlier still pulsed quietly. Noah Carter moved through the aisle with calm efficiency, checking that trays were cleared and seat belts fastened. His steps were sure now. The earlier hesitation replaced by something steadier, the kind of confidence that came from doing the right thing when it mattered. When he reached Cassandra Miles's row, he leaned slightly toward her. "Thank you for what you said earlier," he murmured, careful to keep his voice low. She glanced at him. "What did I say that you're thanking me for? That integrity under pressure matters. I don't think anyone's ever told me that before." Not in those words. Her expression softened. "Then you needed to hear it. People underestimate how those moments shape who you are. Most never realize until it's too late to change them." Noah gave a small nod, as if tucking the words away for later. "I guess I'm just glad I didn't freeze." "You didn't," she said simply. A row behind. Richard Bennett closed his leather-bound notebook. He had been jotting phrases and impressions since the confrontation, his mind already shaping them into something coherent. He knew that writing about what happened would draw attention, and with attention came responsibility. He leaned toward Cassandra. "If I do write something, would you want me to name you directly?" Cassandra's gaze went back to the window for a moment. "Name me if it serves the story. Omit me if it distracts from the point. What matters is that the behavior gets exposed, not that my name is attached." Richard studied her, noting how her answer carried no hint of self-promotion. She wasn't after personal recognition, she was after change. In the rear galley, Harper Lane stacked cups in a bin, her motions sharper than necessary. She had avoided making eye contact with Noah during his trips back, focusing instead on restocking and folding linens. But the echo of her earlier choices lingered. She could not shake the memory of the passengers' faces when the captain had revealed Cassandra's role. She remembered the flicker of shock, the way the energy in the cabin had shifted instantly. For the first time in her career, she wondered if she had crossed a line she could not uncross up front. Noah began securing the galley for landing. The clink of serviceware and the hiss of coffee pots being drained filled the space. Cassandra sat back, feeling the faint change in pressure as the aircraft descended. Richard spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You know, I've presided over trials where bias wasn't obvious until someone described it in detail. That's what happened here. If you hadn't handled it the way you did, it might have gone unnoticed." "That's the danger," Cassandra replied. "When bias hides under professionalism, people excuse it. They say it's a misunderstanding, or they blame it on stress, and if you point it out, they call you sensitive." Richard exhaled slowly. "I've seen that. I've probably let it slide myself in the past." "We all have," she said gently. "The question is what we do after we recognize it." The seatbelt sign chimed on, and passengers began adjusting their seats. Noah moved quickly, but without rush, making sure bags were stowed and latches secured. When he returned to Cassandra's row one last time, she said, "You handled yourself well today, Mr. Carter. I imagine the next few days might be complicated for you, but remember the truth has a way of surviving scrutiny." He smiled faintly. "I'll hold on to that." In the rear galley, Harper braced herself against the counter as the aircraft tilted slightly in descent. She thought about approaching Cassandra to apologize before they landed, but the thought of speaking the words aloud made her throat tighten. Pride was heavy, and it sat between her and the action she knew she should take. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Noah took his jump seat in the front, across from Cassandra's row. Their eyes met briefly. A silent acknowledgement passing between them, a recognition that the events of this flight were not finished simply because the wheels would soon touch down. Cassandra turned her gaze out the window. The city was coming into focus now. Streets and rooftops arranged in a tidy pattern below. From this height, it all looked orderly, untouched by the frictions that defined life on the ground. She thought about the meeting she would call within hours of landing, the questions she would ask her senior team. And she thought about Harper Lane, standing at the back of the aircraft, perhaps realizing or refusing to realize what her actions had revealed. The flaps extended with a deep, mechanical hum. The nose tilted slightly upward, and the view of the water gave way to the outline of the runway in the distance. Richard leaned back, his hands resting on the notebook in his lap. He had made his decision. He would write the op-ed. He would not just tell the story. He would challenge the industry to address the quiet, persistent bias that could poison even the most polished service. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Monroe kept his hands steady on the controls. The earlier scene still lingered in his mind, but now it came with a clarity. Leadership was not just about flying the plane. It was about the choices made in the cabin as much as the ones made in the air. The landing gear deployed with a muted thud. The runway drew closer, the city stretching out in every direction. Cassandra took a slow breath, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. She could feel the moment crystallizing in her mind. The entire flight condensed into a set of lessons, some for her, some for her crew, and some for an industry that too often looked the other way. The tires met the runway with a firm, controlled impact. A rush of air filled the cabin as the engines reversed thrust, slowing them quickly. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Passengers reached for their phones, unlocking them with eager swipes. The mundane rhythm of post-landing activity began overhead, bins opening, seat belts clicking free, but Cassandra remained seated, her movements unhurried. Change, she knew, did not happen in the rush. It happened in the quiet moments after, when decisions took root. Noah unbuckled and stepped into the aisle, assisting passengers with their bags. His tone remained warm, his posture upright, as though determined to end the flight the same way he had salvaged it, with steady respect. At the rear, Harper waited for the chance to exit without crossing Cassandra's path. But a part of her knew that avoidance would not erase what had happened. The memory of it would follow her long after the aircraft was emptied. Cassandra stood at last, gathering her bag. Richard rose beside her. Their eyes met, briefly allies forged not by design, but by shared witness. The door opened, and cool terminal air spilled into the cabin. Cassandra stepped into it, already carrying the weight of what she intended to do next. The jet bridge was cool and quiet compared to the cabin. Cassandra Miles stepped onto it with the same unhurried pace she had carried throughout the flight. Her bag rolled smoothly behind her, the steady click of its wheels echoing softly in the narrow passage. Richard Bennett walked alongside her, his notebook tucked under his arm. He was quiet, but it was not the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of a man turning thoughts into something sharper. In the cabin behind them, Noah Carter helped the last passengers retrieve their bags. He gave each one a polite farewell, his tone genuine even for those who had barely spoken to him during the flight. When the aisle was clear, he began his final sweep, checking for stray items and securing the galley. Harper Lane lingered at the rear, avoiding eye contact with him. She busied herself with folding the jump seat harness and stowing service carts, but her mind was elsewhere on the conversation she knew was coming. Cassandra reached the gate area, where the bustle of the terminal swallowed the quiet of the bridge. She glanced toward the airline operations desk just beyond the seating area. A uniformed ground manager stood there, scanning the arriving passengers. He spotted her instantly and approached with brisk steps. "Dr. Miles," he said, his tone respectful but tinged with urgency. "I was told to expect you. Do you have a moment to speak in the operations room?" "Yes," she said, "but we'll make it brief." Richard started to follow, but Cassandra held up a hand. "I'll meet you at baggage claim in 20 minutes. Wait for me there." He nodded, understanding that whatever was about to happen wasn't meant for an audience. The manager led her into a small side room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a muted monitor showing flight statuses. Another man stood waiting tall, mid-40s, with a badge identifying him as the station supervisor. "Dr. Miles," he said as she entered, "we've been made aware of an incident in first class. Captain Monroe sent a preliminary report during descent. I wanted to hear directly from you before we proceed." Cassandra placed her bag beside the chair and sat. "I'll give you a clear account, and then I expect a formal investigation to follow. But let's be very clear. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern." As she spoke, she detailed the sequence of events: Harper's initial dismissiveness, the refusal of service, the imbalance in tone between passengers, the open hostility when Cassandra asked a simple question. She described Noah's intervention, the captain's decision, and the shift in cabin atmosphere after Harper's reassignment. The supervisor listened, his jaw tightening as she spoke. "I appreciate your clarity," he said when she finished. "This will be addressed immediately. "It will." Cassandra agreed, but not just with her. "I want to see a review of the entire first-class crew training protocol. I want unconscious bias testing built into every performance review for customer-facing staff. And I want the internal complaint process revised so passengers receive documented responses instead of vague apologies." The room was quiet for a moment. The manager and supervisor exchanged a glance. They both knew her influence went beyond one station or one flight. "I'll begin the report tonight," the supervisor said. "You'll have it on your desk within 48 hours. "Good," Cassandra said, standing, "because I'll be in touch with the board by morning." In the cabin, Harper stood by the galley door as Captain Monroe stepped out of the cockpit. He gave Noah a brief nod of approval before turning to Harper. "Can you step into the jet bridge with me for a moment?" he asked. Her stomach dropped. "Of course, Captain." The narrow space outside the cabin was quieter now. Most passengers already gone. He faced her squarely. "I've been flying for 30 years. "Harper," he began, "I've had crew members make mistakes before, but I can't remember the last time I saw a situation de-escalated only by removing a senior attendant from service mid-flight. That's a problem. I didn't mean for it to escalate," she said quickly. "She took it the wrong way. I was." He held up a hand. "Stop. This isn't about defending your tone. This is about the fact that every passenger in that cabin saw what happened and understood it for what it was, including the one passenger you should never have underestimated." Harper's jaw tightened. "I didn't know who she was." "That's exactly the point," he said evenly. "You don't treat people differently based on who they are, or who you think they are. You treat them with the same respect every time." She swallowed hard, feeling the truth of it press uncomfortably against her defenses. "You'll be contacted by the supervisor before your next shift," he continued. "Until then, I'd suggest you think about how you want to explain today's choices." When he walked away, Harper stood for a moment in the empty bridge, her mind a tangle of defensiveness and the creeping awareness that she had crossed a line she couldn't easily step back over. At baggage claim. Cassandra found Richard waiting with his notebook open. Noah was there too, standing off to the side, clearly debating whether to approach. "You handled yourself well after landing," Cassandra said to him. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. "I wasn't sure if I should come say goodbye." "You should," she said. "Integrity doesn't end when the seatbelt sign turns off." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "I'll remember that." Richard closed his notebook. "I've decided," he told her. "I'm going to write it. Not just about what happened, but about why it matters. Too many people still think discrimination is only the blatant stuff." Cassandra's expression warmed, though her voice stayed steady. "Then you understand the work ahead. Because when it's quiet, when it's subtle, that's when it's hardest to prove and easiest to excuse." The carousel groaned to life, bags beginning their slow loop. Cassandra retrieved hers, then extended a hand to Noah. "Good luck to you. Don't lose what you found in yourself today." He shook her hand firmly. "I won't, ma'am." As she walked toward the exit, Richard fell into step beside her. "You're going to change things after this, aren't you?" "I already have," she said simply. And with that, she stepped into the terminal's bright, echoing space, a place where travelers hurried past without knowing that, somewhere between departure and arrival, the first chapter of something larger had just been written. By the time Cassandra Miles reached her hotel suite, the city outside was wrapped in the deep blue of evening. The skyline glittered in the distance, but she barely looked at it. She rolled her bag into the corner, placed her phone on the desk, and opened her laptop. The first call went to her executive assistant, who answered before the second ring. "Doctor, Miles, I figured you'd want to connect tonight. I need the senior leadership team in a secure video conference within 40 minutes. Cassandra said, "No delays. Tell them it's operational priority." "Yes, ma'am." She ended the call and took a slow breath. She had spent years building Aurora Skies into more than just an airline, into a company that claimed inclusivity as part of its public identity. What happened on Flight 207 had pierced that image, and Cassandra knew better than anyone that public claims were worthless without lived reality. As she reviewed the captain's preliminary report, she highlighted key sections: timeline, passenger reactions, crew reassignment. She was meticulous not because she didn't trust her memory, but because she intended for every action she took next to withstand scrutiny from both her board and the press if needed. At the 40-minute mark, faces appeared on her screen: Chief Operations Officer, Head of HR, Legal Counsel, and the Director of In-Flight Services. Some looked tired, others looked wary. All of them knew that a call at this hour meant something had gone wrong. Cassandra wasted no time. "You've all received the captain's report. What you don't have is my direct account. I'll give it to you now." Her voice was steady, measured, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. She recounted Harper Lane's actions from boarding to reassignment. She spoke of Noah Carter's intervention, the captain's decision, and the shift in the cabin once Harper was removed. She noted the passengers who had witnessed it and the reputational risk if even one of them decided to take the story public before the airline acted. When she finished, there was a pause. The COO was the first to speak. "It's clear disciplinary action is required. We can initiate an immediate suspension pending investigation." "Do it," Cassandra said, "and I want the investigation to include past passenger feedback on Miss Lane's service. If there's a pattern, we will find it." The Director of In-Flight Services shifted in his seat. "Cassandra, with respect, we also have to consider crew morale. If this is perceived as overcorrection, it's not overcorrection." She interrupted calmly. "It's course correction. Morale is important, but so is accountability. We don't keep people in positions of authority over passengers if they cannot handle that authority with fairness." Legal counsel leaned forward. "Do you want this contained internally? Or are you considering a public statement?" "Internal first," Cassandra replied. "Public if necessary. I'm not in the business of making examples for show. I'm in the business of making change that lasts longer than a news cycle." The COO nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll coordinate with HR on the suspension notice." "Good," Cassandra said. "And one more thing, we need to revise the training modules. This cannot be reduced to a box-ticking exercise. I want scenario-based training, implicit bias recognition, and documented performance audits." Her tone left no room for negotiation. She ended the meeting with clear deadlines and the reminder that every executive's performance review would now include equity implementation metrics. Meanwhile, across the city, Harper Lane sat at her kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling untouched beside her. She had gone home in silence, ignoring the few curious texts from colleagues. The day's events replayed in her mind in fragments: Cassandra's calm gaze, the captain's clipped words, the shifting expressions on passengers' faces. When her phone buzzed with the HR director's number, she hesitated before answering. Harper. The voice on the other end began. This is to inform you that you are suspended from active duty pending an internal investigation into the incident on Flight 207. The words hit like cold water. Suspended. Without a chance to explain, you'll have the opportunity to provide a written statement within 24 hours, the director said evenly. But, given the initial reports and the involvement of executive leadership, the suspension is effective immediately. Harper's throat tightened. How long will the investigation take? Typically a week, but it could extend depending on the scope. You'll be contacted if further information is needed. Until then, you're not to perform any company duties. The call ended before Harper could respond. She stared at the phone, anger and fear colliding in her chest. For years, she had worked flights without major incident, priding herself on handling demanding passengers. But tonight, sitting alone in her quiet kitchen, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe she hadn't been as fair as she'd told herself. Back in her hotel suite, Cassandra closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The work was only beginning. She knew that suspending Harper would ripple through the crew network. Some would see it as overdue, others as an attack on a respected colleague. But Cassandra had learned long ago that leadership meant choosing the course that served the greater truth, not the most comfortable one. Her phone buzzed with a message from Richard Bennett. Dinner tomorrow. My treat. I have an outline I want you to see. She smiled faintly. Dinner works, but only if you're ready for me to challenge every sentence. Wouldn't expect anything less, he replied. Noah Carter's name appeared next. Thank you for backing me up today. I hope I didn't cause trouble for you, Cassandra typed back. Doing the right thing doesn't cause trouble. It reveals it. She set the phone down and allowed herself a brief moment to look out at the city lights. Somewhere out there. Passengers from Flight 207 were telling their versions of what happened. Maybe some would keep it to themselves. Maybe others would tell it over dinner tables or in social media posts. Either way, the truth was already moving beyond her control, and that was fine, because she had already set the real work in motion. In another part of the city, Harper poured her untouched tea down the sink. She stood at the counter, staring at the blank page of the statement form she'd been emailed. She wasn't sure whether to defend herself or admit fault. The words felt slippery before she could even write them. She picked up a pen, then set it down again. For the first time in her career, Harper Lane wasn't certain what version of the truth she believed. The week after, Flight 207 was a blur of reports, statements, and closed-door meetings. Cassandra Miles returned to headquarters with her usual quiet presence. But every department knew her focus had narrowed. Conversation stopped when she walked through a corridor, not because she was feared, but because everyone sensed this was one of those moments that would define the airline's next decade. On the 7th day, the investigation report landed on her desk. She read every word: passenger interviews, crew testimonies, archived performance reviews. Harper Lane's record told a story she already suspected, nothing dramatic enough to trigger past disciplinary action, but patterns in passenger feedback that hinted at a consistent edge in her treatment toward certain customers. The language in the comments was coded, but Cassandra had learned to read between the lines. By noon, she had called a meeting with the director of in-flight services and HR. They sat across from her, folders in hand. Termination is warranted. HR began. There's enough here to justify it on both conduct and company policy grounds. I agree, Cassandra said. But it's not just about ending her employment. This has to be a turning point. We need to ensure our people understand why this happened and why it matters. The director nodded reluctantly. Some crew will see this as management throwing one of their own under the bus. Then they'll need to learn that fairness isn't optional, Cassandra replied. If we compromise on that, we compromise on everything. While HR prepared the official notice, Cassandra drafted a memo to all employees. It began simply, "The integrity of our service is measured not by how we treat those who can benefit us, but by how we treat those we think cannot." She reviewed the words twice before sending it to the communications team for distribution. That afternoon, Harper arrived at headquarters, summoned for her final meeting. She walked into the HR conference room with her chin lifted, though her eyes betrayed the fatigue of a week spent in uncertainty. The HR director spoke first, reading from the prepared statement. After thorough review of the events on Flight 207 and your past performance history, the decision has been made to terminate your employment effective immediately. Harper's fingers tightened on the arms of the chair. So that's it. 15 years gone in a week. It's the culmination of multiple factors, HR replied, but the decision is final. For a long moment, Harper didn't move. When she finally rose, she didn't speak another word. She walked out, her steps brisk, the echo fading down the hall. Cassandra, watching from her office window across the courtyard, felt no satisfaction in the outcome. Leadership wasn't about enjoying consequences. It was about ensuring they served a purpose. And now, the purpose was to build something stronger in the absence left behind. 2 days later, Cassandra convened the executive board. The agenda was simple present and approved the Aurora Equity Initiative, a comprehensive overhaul of training, accountability, and passenger care protocols. She stood at the head of the table, the city skyline framing her silhouette. "This is not a reactionary measure," she began. "This is a necessary evolution. Our goal is not just to prevent incidents like Flight 207, but to create an environment where they cannot take root." The initiative included quarterly equity training for all staff, scenario-based evaluations for crew, a passenger feedback platform with real-time escalation, and an independent review panel for bias-related complaints. When she finished, the room was quiet until the board chair spoke. "Cassandra, this is ambitious. It will require investment, and not all of it will yield visible returns immediately. Some returns aren't measured in quarterly reports," she said. "They're measured in trust, and trust, once broken, costs more than any training program." The motion passed unanimously. That evening, Cassandra met Richard Bennett for the dinner they'd planned. They sat in a quiet corner of a small restaurant, his notebook open beside his plate. "I read your draft," she told him after the server left. "You've captured the facts well, but the heart of it that comes when you explain why silence is the accomplice of bias." Richard smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear from you." They talked long into the night, about the power of bearing witness, the courage it took for Noah to act, and the unseen ripples set in motion by one moment of refusal. Meanwhile, Noah Carter boarded another flight, this time with a steadier step. His colleagues had heard the story in fragments, and some looked at him differently now with respect, even if they didn't say it aloud. He carried Cassandra's words with him, not as a shield, but as a compass. In the months that followed, the Aurora Equity Initiative took root. Training sessions filled conference rooms. Supervisors began using new evaluation criteria. Passengers noticed subtle changes in the way they were greeted, addressed, and treated. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement in the right direction. One afternoon, Cassandra received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten. I didn't want to admit it, but you're right. I crossed a line. I hope you know I'm trying to understand why I did. H.L. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. It wasn't absolution, but it was a sign that the message had reached even the one who resisted it most. Months later, Cassandra boarded another first-class cabin, bound for a different city. The crew greeted her with warmth and ease, the service flowing without hesitation or imbalance. As she settled into her seat, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, knowing that while there would always be more work ahead, the course had been set. Outside the window, the runway lights blurred into motion as the aircraft accelerated. The wheels lifted, the ground fell away, and Cassandra Miles leaned back, her mind already fixed on the horizon, not just the one in the sky, but the one she was determined to shape. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that never rises above calm. Cassandra Miles didn't need to shout to change the course of an airline she simply refused to let injustice pass unnoticed. Her quiet strength reminded us that prejudice doesn't always arrive wearing a sign. Sometimes it hides in the smallest gestures, the softest tones, the moments we tell ourselves maybe it's nothing. But it is something. It always is. On Flight 207, one act of bias was met with the steady hand of leadership, and from that, an entire culture began to shift. The lesson, respect, is not optional. It's the ground we all stand on in the air and everywhere. If this story moved you, let it move you to action. Speak when it's hard. Stand when it's easier to sit. And never, ever let silence become consent. We have more stories that will challenge, inspire, and keep these conversations alive. Like, share, and subscribe and join us for the next journey. Because change is a flight we take together.